Hi, y'all. Thanks for joining today. It's 6:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started off. We have got a jam-packed presentation for you today, all about Google Tag Manager. So I want to make sure that we leave enough time for that. We are in our 18th year of search engine marketing. This DFW-SEM organization is possible because of a lot of different board members. I'm your president, Julie Jones. We've also got your treasurer, Bart Peters, your secretary, Jenna Williams, our VP of State of Search and Hospitality, Chris O'Connor, our VP of Membership and Registration, Kevin Adams, our VP of Sponsorship, Jordan Pearson, and our board member at large, Tim Shane. But we are always looking for new people to help join us. So if you want to participate on a committee with us, talk to a board member or email membership@dfwsem.org. And State of Search is coming up this year. It's going to be in October. We have already got the venue reserved and are accepting speaker applications. So this is going to be a jam-packed conference. We've had a lot of great speakers in the past, and this year is going to be no different. So get your tickets now. They're available on Eventbrite, and we would love to see you either in person or virtually. Members always save more with DFW-SEM. We've got a couple of different membership options. So if you want to email membership@dfwsem.org, we can hook you up with a great membership. Virtual memberships always get a copy of the recording afterwards. So this recording will be made available to all of y'all. But for our virtual members, you can get all of our presentations from last year as well. So it's a great opportunity that you can't miss out on. And if you're hiring or looking for a job, go ahead and email us at info@dfwsem.org, and we would love to help post your job. Coming up next month, we have got Cindy, who's going to talk about some upcoming changes with paid search. She has always been a crowd pleaser with DFW-SEM, so you don't want to miss that. And then let us know what you think. We've got a survey online as to how you think I did. But with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to, I guess, myself, and I'll present on Google Tag Manager. Okay, so Google Tag Manager is super exciting to me because it means more efficient and more effective tracking for y'all. And I wanted to start off with a little bit about me. That way you know who's speaking. I am your DFW-SEM president. I started in SEO and in Google Analytics back in 2015, and I've led Tag Manager implementations and analytics implementations from Fortune 500 companies to even the small startups. In 2019, I decided to share my knowledge with anyone who would listen, and I created learnwebanalytics.org. And this past year, I transitioned to do marketing analytics full-time as opposed to just part-time and doing SEO part-time. And so I now am working for Baylor Scott & White, helping lead all of their analytics efforts. And a little bit about the non-work side of me. I love murder mysteries like Columbo, Monk, Psych, and I'm recently gotten into The Mentalist. I am an avid runner, and I still consider myself a newlywed. I married my husband, Greg, back in 2019. But enough about me. Let's learn about Google Tag Manager. So Google gives a great definition for Tag Manager that describes it as a tag management system. You can use code fragments, fire them on your website, and that's great and all, but sometimes metaphors are better used to explain things, and Google Tag Manager is no exception. So let's say that you want to go see a movie. The movie is Die Hard, and Die Hard is a great movie, but it is also an R-rated movie, okay? And R-rated, I don't know if y'all know this, but you have to be 17 to go see an R-rated movie. Not a problem, because you've got your handy dandy license, and it shows that you are indeed 17 years of age. And let's say that you just turned 17, so you go up to the movie counter and you say, I'd like to purchase a ticket for Die Hard, and they say, great, we would love to we'd love to admit you, and because you only have one card, you're 18, you don't need a wallet. Now 10 years later, and you go back, and sure enough, they are showing Die Hard in the movie theaters again. Now by this time, you're about 27 years old, so you've started to pack a little bit of extra baggage. Die Hard is still R-rated though, which means you still have to prove that you are over 18. So you've got your license, and that's great. But then you also got a Visa credit card, and you got an American Express, and you understand the benefits of Costco, so you've got a Costco membership. There is a CVS card that you've gotten for rewards. You got a birthday gift card at Macy's, a Starbucks card because now you're in the working world and need all that caffeine. You've got a Kroger Plus card to get your groceries. And then, oh, yep, you found another gift card for way back in the day to get some gas. I don't know about y'all, but it's a little hard to find my ID right now. And guess what? You still don't have a wallet. A wallet really would make this all easier, right? You could organize everything, and that way, whenever you go up to purchase a movie ticket, you don't have to sort through 8 or 9 different cards with no organization. So Google Tag Manager is very similar. You've got your website, and it's got Google Analytics on it. There was one tag, and so there was no need for a wallet on your website. But 10 years later, you have Google Analytics, but then we also have Google Ads, and then you decide to branch out into social. So you've got Facebook and LinkedIn, and then you've also gotten DoubleClick because you're starting to dabble in display, and then you also get the Trade Desk. After all that, you decide, well, why might as well go into UX. So you've also got some UX software, some Hotjar, which is a heat mapping software, all on your website. And guess what? There's still no wallet. So Google decided to make a solution for this. And their version of a wallet is called Google Tag Manager. And this helps keep everything organized in one place, and it's available for non-technical people like myself to use. So to give a summary of that metaphor, Google Tag Manager is kind of like a wallet for your website tracking tags. And it may hold many different types of cards like Google Analytics, Google Ads. But remember, just because you have a wallet doesn't mean you necessarily have cards. So you still need to add cards to that. And that's part of what I'm going to show you today. Now, Google Tag Manager, this was really interesting to me because Google Tag Manager was launched in October 2012, but nobody really adopted it. And that meant that 5 years after launching it, only about 10% of people who were using Google Analytics were deploying it through Google Tag Manager. Now, in 2017, Google Analytics released the Global Site Tag. And this is not Google Tag Manager, but the two are so similar that I always like to stop and let y'all know about the differences, and that way you know what to look out for. So the G tag, the Global Site Tag, was unified tracking for analytics, Google Optimize, Google Ads, and Google actually pushed this pretty hard, harder than they pushed Google Tag Manager. I remember getting a notification back in the day that said, hey, you need to upgrade your analytics implementation. So this unified tagging, though, wait, isn't that what Julie's talking about with Google Tag Manager? Well, it gets more complicated. The Global Site Tag even uses some of the same features as Google Tag Manager, like the data layer, which we'll talk about later, and it references Google Tag Manager in its script. So if you have a right-click and view source on any website and you see, googletagmanager.com, don't assume that that's Google Tag Manager, okay? If it has googletagmanager.com/gtag, that means it's actually the Global Site Tag. Now, I commend Google for Global Site Tag. It seems pretty nice, but with Global Site Tag, you can only implement Google-related properties. and you're still relying pretty heavily on the developer. So you don't have that cool interface like you have with Google Tag Manager. And so these early adopters of Google Tag Manager really didn't have a need for a G tag because everything automatically upgraded, which meant that people who were early adopters were already doing tagging more efficiently. So let's talk about how we put Google Tag Manager on your website. So it's pretty simple to start off with. You go to tagmanager.google.com and you create an account. This is going to give you a couple of different options. For the sake of this presentation, we're going to stick with web for now, and we'll go into server at the very end. But you just name your account and your website. It's very similar to how your Google Analytics is set up. So Google Analytics has an account and then a property. Google Tag Manager has an account and then a container. So think of that, you only use one property, one domain. Really, generally, it's one container, one domain. But if you have like a super large company with multiple domains, then they may all fall under the same account. Same exact principle. And as soon as you start to create the account, Google's going to say, hey, here's the instructions for adding this to your website. Not a problem. We copy and we paste. The bottom part of the code is really cool because if somebody is disabling JavaScript on your website, this allows Google Tag Manager to still process. Now, it's not going to contain all the information, but it's nice to have a backup. If you are like me and you do some websites on the side and you just need a plugin to install it because you don't have easy access to a developer, I like the Google Tag Manager for WordPress developer. All you need is the GTM and then your number part. So super simple. Now, once you finish creating this account, you're going to get this screen. And you're going to have tags, triggers, and variables on this on the left-hand side. So let's talk about what we mean by that. So tags is what you need to fire. Maybe it's a Google Ads pixel. Maybe it's a Facebook pixel. Maybe it's Google Analytics event tracking. And triggers is going to tell you when you want to fire that. So for Google Analytics, if we want to track all page views, well, then our trigger should probably be all page views. But for Facebook conversion tracking, maybe you only want it to fire on the thank you page or a download button click. And then variables, this is going to be the hardest one to grasp. So hold on and we'll dive into some examples that'll really demonstrate this a little bit better. So variables are going to be placeholders for values that are populated within the code. So for example, think of your page URL, your page host name, a click text. The idea is that it's dynamically populated. And so we'll show you how to use those. And you can even have variables within variables in addition to adding them to your tags and your triggers. Okay, so let's create our first tag. We just click the new button and then we name it. Now, anybody who knows me knows that I am pretty particular about a lot of things because it makes me more efficient. My naming of Google Tag Manager tags is no exception. So you see download white paper, and then I have created -universal analytics right next to it. And that's because you can't repeat tag names, but that consistency is going to help you understand without further diving into any of your tags that you have the same exact tag, but it's just on a couple of different platforms. Like if you ultimately launch Facebook or LinkedIn, something like that. So whenever you create the tag, Google gives you a lot of different options. And this is what's going to make it so efficient because you can keep everything the same and then just change out the different tags. So we see here that we've got Google Analytics 4 included. And that Google Analytics 4 is going to make it a lot easier whenever you transition your Google Analytics from Universal Analytics to the latest version. If y'all are still a little bit uncertain about Google Analytics 4, this is where DFW SEM membership comes into play because we actually had a talk on it back in June, and you can get access to that. So shameless plug right there, but Google Analytics 4 is awesome. You want to make sure that you're prepared for it though, which is why you're using Google Tag Manager. So with Google Tag Manager, for this tag, we're going to do an event, okay? Let's say that you want to become a better data-driven marketer. So you want to know whenever somebody downloads a white paper on your website. Now, this isn't a page view. And so because it's a non-page view interaction, that's a Google Analytics event. And we're going to populate our category, our action, and our label. But wait, doesn't that label look a little funny? The label contains a variable. So this is what I was talking about when I said it's a lot easier to see it in person. So the little curly brackets are variables, and I didn't have to remember that page URLs was the name of the variable. If you just start with those curly brackets, all these variables will start appearing. Now, by default, Google has about 5 built-in variables, but the list is super long. So you can do things like enable the click text, what CTA were people clicking on the most, or the click URL. Maybe you've got a link to a PDF, what PDFs were people downloading. So you can enable all of these, and it requires very little extra work on your part. Technically, a button click is some work, though, so I won't say it's zero work. But back to our tag, though. So scrolling down for Google Analytics tags, you'll see select settings variable. And you have the option to either choose a built-in variable or create a new variable. Unfortunately, you'll need to create a new variable, which you're probably saying, well, Julie, this is brand new and now you're already asking me to create variables. Yes, but I promise you've got this, okay? Automatically, Google populates this Google Analytics settings variable. And you have the option to type in your Google Analytics code directly, but I don't recommend it. And here's why. I would recommend instead adding a variable inside your variable. And this variable is going to come in the form of a lookup table. Now, whenever I'm creating my variables, you've got a lot of different types of variables. If you are introducing Google Tag Manager for the first time to a developer, I would recommend showing them this variable screen, okay? Because this is where developers are going to get excited. They can add JavaScript variables, they can add first-party cookie variables. Super exciting for extra technical people. But I digress. We want to keep scrolling to find our lookup table. There it is. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the page host name. Now, when I say page host name, that's your domain name, but it's www or subdomain specific. So for example, www.example.com and example.com are two separate host names. And with those host names, we're going to fire one Google Analytics code in there. But let's say that we have our dev URLs and staging, dev, wherever you do your QA, and you don't necessarily want to send live traffic there. You want to send a different Google Analytics code. And that's where this is going to come into play. Now, for those that are, this is an awesome feature for a couple of reasons. If you haven't yet launched a website, but you want to go ahead and start up your Google Tag Manager, or if you're like me, I like to give our developers a little bit of extra grace. And if they have the same container on the dev site and the live site, then they don't have to worry about pushing the wrong Google Tag Manager container and completely disrupting your website. This is one thing that's really, really important. You have this default value down here, and that says, hey, if nothing in my list matches, then go ahead and send this Google Analytics code. I really would recommend you making sure that you have a default value. If you have a very large site with a lot of spam traffic, then maybe you can kind of test it out. But generally speaking, especially if this is your first time with a lookup table, set that default value and then later filter out some of the traffic that you're seeing if you see some traffic from spam. Now, for those of you who are more advanced, I would recommend a regex table, but make sure you test thoroughly. And for those of you who aren't familiar with regex, what I've done here is I've created the 4 lines that we had previously, and I've shortened them into 2 lines because this regex is going to be a shorthand version of anything you're trying to type out within Google Analytics. So it's worth taking a little bit of a dive, but if not, if you're only comfortable with the lookup table, that's okay. Okay. So then what you want to do is you've created your event. It's got your Google Analytics settings. And now we want to figure out when it's going to fire. So we want to make sure that we choose our triggers wisely. And Google Tag Manager gives you a wide variety to choose from. There we go. So variables such as click text, that's a really easy one to use, but you're going to break your website in the long run, okay? Especially if you're A/B testing or if somebody else is in charge of your content. It's super easy to break things. Now, click classes and IDs, whoa, we're starting to talk about development here, but that is going to leave you with a solution that in the long term is going to benefit you. And there are lots of different tutorials online with how to do this. And I'll kind of walk you through some instances here. So, for example, we have a download a white paper. I just Googled this online, and you can click get the guide, and it's very small, but you'll see there that there is a button class that says button-green. So if I wanted to create a tag that fires on whenever somebody clicks that button, then I would want to say, okay, my trigger is all elements, and I'm going to do a click element that matches the CSS collector button green. Now, here's the deal of why I really like CSS selectors, because you'll notice here, that's not actually a green button, right? So these people are already A/B testing on everything, which means that their chances of their code breaking if they didn't use classes has already increased exponentially. So love the classes. You can also have what's called an ID attached to your buttons. So this is going to be even more future-proof, but you have to understand how IDs work. So I would recommend, I've got a blog on my website for you to look at that describes anchor tag IDs, but it's very easy. You have the same trigger where you say, I just want to fire on some clicks where the CSS selector is download. And there we're identifying the ID that we want to download it with. Here is the link to the anchor tag or to the ID blog, which explains code, but in a way that's not as overwhelming. Beyond classes and IDs, though, so we started off with something really complex because sometimes the most complex things are the ones that are tied back to your ROI. But beyond classes and IDs, there are some really basic triggers that I recommend everybody implementing on their website. So, for example, this is a tag I created that says, hey, anytime somebody clicks the click to call button, go ahead and fire. So you'll see down here, this is a trigger. It fires on any link, and the click URL contains this telephone. And then, of course, I added in some regex here. This is short for anything and everything. So if you read this in its entirety, we're going to fire on every page for some link clicks where your click URL contains telephone. Now, there has recently been, you'll see this check validation, this big yellow alert. This used to not be there. And this says, when you mouse over it, it says only fire on tags when opening the link is considered a valid action. And they're saying, oh, well, we don't recommend it. That was kind of funny to me, because why would you want to fire on invalid clicks? So I see Google giving me their warning that I shouldn't check validation, but I like to check validation because I don't like invalid actions. Another tag that I've created, or a trigger, is if somebody clicks on an email. Again, we've got this matches anything, and then click URL starts with mail to. Or what if you want to send an event anytime somebody clicks on one of your social links? So here we've got, we'll show this trigger on every page, but only on some link clicks whenever we're showing Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. So that's kind of the shorthand that I was using. Or outbound links. Here I said, I want to fire this tag on any click URL, but I don't want it to be a social link. I don't want it to be a telephone link, I don't want it to be an email link, and I don't want it to be my own website. And in this case, my website's name was texandgoods.com. Okay, so now you may be saying, well, Julie, all these events are great, but I've done a little bit of research on Google Analytics 4, and they say that I don't need Google Tag Manager. Well, that's true, but remember, this talk is all about how do we become more efficient. And if you want to become efficient and effective, I recommend still deploying your tags through Google Tag Manager, because this helps you scale across channels and making sure that you have an apples to apples comparison. So I've walked y'all through how we created this download white paper tag, but then what if we wanted to do some more channels? Well, here I go and I create a different tag. I create a Google Ads conversion tag. And then look, I can select from the same triggers that I had before. So I would click download white paper, and then I'm done. Or what if I wanted to implement the Facebook pixel? So Facebook gives some great instructions on their website. It would be a custom HTML tag. I would copy and paste it. I would select the same exact trigger of download white paper, and boom, I've got the same tag, but now to download the white paper. And then I mentioned that we're going to do some Google Analytics 4 in the future, right? But I want to make sure that whenever I transfer, I don't lose any of my event tracking. So I configure the tag, add the same exact trigger, which is download white paper, and then voila, I have the GA4 trigger as well. I'm sorry, the GA4 tag. Now, knowing that you have tags is great, but knowing that your tags are working properly is even better. So this section is going to be about how do you test those. Google makes it really easy. And I think that this testing is probably one of the main reasons why I like Google Tag Manager, because without this, you were dependent on things like Google Ads or the Facebook pixel, and those weren't always accurate. So here, you would type in your website's URL. It would say you're connected. And for the sake of this, we're going to use my website, texandgoods.com. So if I load the page just initially, it'll show me what tags are fired. My base Google Analytics code, and I also installed some heat mapping, so we've got Hotjar there as well. Now, when I clicked on a new page, and that page was all about lip balms, all of a sudden, you have a new section on your left-hand side that says lip balms, lip glosses, etc. Now, whenever I clicked on a link, you can see in the summary that all of a sudden an outbound link tag was fired. And you see in line 16 on the left-hand side that there was a link click. If we dive into that, that link click shows that it was an outbound link. And it's going to show me specifically what I did. So it's going to say the category. If I clicked show more, it would show me the action and the label. And it would tell me exactly why this tag fired. So it would say, yes, this is a Google Tag Manager link click. And no, it's not any of your social URLs. It's also not a telephone URL. It's not a mail to, and also it's off domain. So now I know why my tag fired. Now on that same one, you'll see the tags that were not fired. This is sometimes almost more helpful than why they did fire. So if you're trying to debug why something exactly didn't fire, you go into this click URL, or you click into why a tag wasn't fired, and it'll tell you exactly why. So there's ways to use tagging for a better user experience. So this is if you're trying to improve the UX on your website. I've included 3 tags that are going to help you get there. So this first one is if you want to track some JavaScript errors. So if JavaScript isn't firing on your website, things break. And luckily, Google Tag Manager will let you know whenever that happens. So for example, you can just configure some of your built-in variables. So you'd go to the variables left-hand side of your screen and see these here. You'd select error message, error URL, and error line. You'd then add in your built-in variables to your action and your label. And whenever we say error URL, that's going to be your actual JavaScript URL. And then the label is going to tell you what specific line it was on, and then the page URL, because I want to know what page it was misfiring on. For the error line, what I found in the past is that it's not exactly a one-for-one, but it gives you a general direction to search in. And then you want to send it as a non-interaction hit, because what this does is it says, hey, we don't want to impact our bounce rate at all if we do have an error. So you're not inflating your metrics one way or the other. And then for the trigger type, you just select JavaScript error. And then you're done. Now the tag number 2 is scroll depth. So I like this one, but I don't like it out of the box. And so you're going to get some special tricks here. So first, you'll enable the scroll depth threshold. This is another built-in variable that you'll need to configure. You'll fill out your category, your action, and your label, because you'll want to send this as an event. It's not a page view. And then for our trigger type, we'll use scroll depth. Now, here's what I don't like about this. You can choose between vertical and horizontal scrolling, and that's great. But if you just fill out the percentages, it's going to throw off your tracking, especially if you have really short pages. So if you have a really short page, what this Google Analytics trigger is going to do is it's going to say, hey, they scrolled 100% of the way down the page. Well, if there wasn't anything to scroll, of course they got 100% of the way down the page. So if you're really trying to understand your scroll depth, here's where you have to do one of those variables within a variable. You'd want to add a custom variable. This one is going to be a custom JavaScript variable. And most of what I do in Google Tag Manager is searching on other people's websites for people who have already solved this. So Simo Ahava is one of my favorite Google Tag Manager people. He understands how to get this custom JavaScript to fire. And what that's going to do is that's going to say, hey, if you have a super short page, then don't fire this scroll depth tracking. Make sure to where a user actually scrolls before you say, yes, they scrolled 75% of the way down the page, 75%. Click save, and then you've got your scroll depth. Okay, so tag 3. This is one that's really going to be a value add for your clients, okay? And possibly a selling tool for your agency. So Google Tag Manager has a built-in integration with a company called Hotjar. Hotjar is just heat mapping software. So if you've got some ideas as to why your campaigns are underperforming, well, I think the button's too small, or I think people are clicking on a button that's not actually a button, you can install Hotjar on the website pretty easily. And that way people will be able to, or that way you can show your client, hey, we've got these issues with our UX. If we improve these issues, then we improve our conversions. And if we improve our conversions, we improve your bottom line. So all you have to do is add in this Hotjar tracking code, implement your site ID right here, fire it on all pages, and you're done. So this took me probably longer to explain than it actually did, but it's going to give you a great tool for how to really add value to your clients. Now, before I get into this next section in the data layer, I'm looking at the comments, and Chris is totally right. I love to hear your comments on Google Tag Manager. And, do you like what I'm, are you picking up what I'm putting down? If there are any questions, or if you don't agree with me on something, would love to talk about that. So don't be shy. Definitely drop some comments if you are curious about some of the things that I'm talking about. Okay, but we're going to go on to the data layer. Now, the data layer, admittedly, was one of the concepts that I had the hardest time understanding, because no matter how many people talk about the data layer, they always mention that, hey, it's a JavaScript object, it's an array, you push code there, and it makes life easier. And for someone like myself, who is a very visual, practical person, I couldn't understand it. So I think that it's best to use this with an example. So this is what the data layer actually looks like if you populate it with, say the author on a page. Or most commonly, it's used with something like e-commerce, okay? So this is, for example, if I were to purchase an Android shirt, the price was $15.25, it was by Google. You have all these different values that populate. And the best way that I can explain it with a metaphor is that, let's say you're going to a networking event, okay? Way back in the days when those existed. And your job was to get as many people's names and companies and their title as possible, okay? Now you can go around and you can ask everybody for that information, but well, sometimes at networking events, it's a little loud, and so it's hard to understand what somebody is saying. Or maybe sometimes you're cutting into the middle of a conversation. You don't want to make one of your fellow networkers repeat everything that they're saying. Whereas if they had a name tag, that's pretty easy, right? You can just have that information in one place. You always know where to look. It's reliable. So think of the data layer in that same way, okay? It populates in that way. You don't have to jump through hoops to get the information that you need. But it also means that not only Google is helped out, but say like Facebook. So Facebook can actually read and understand your data layer, which cuts down on all your errors and helps present that information clearly. So let's dive into Facebook just for a second. So Facebook, if I am on an e-commerce site in Facebook, I have these different triggers. I have these different pixels where I viewed a page, I added to cart, I started the checkout, and I actually purchased. And there's some other background information. You need what kind of product it was, the price, the currency, etc. Now, Google Analytics, that requires about the same information. Here we have products, how many times it was purchased, what the quantity was, what the revenue was, cart to detail rate, buy to detail rate. Well, that sounds a lot like the same information, right? So what this does with the data layer is that you've still got to put 3 different tags for Facebook. And you still have to put 5 different tags for Google Tag Manager. But what we can do is, you'll notice in my Facebook example, it's going to automatically populate the product price or the product ID. And the same thing with Google Tag Manager. It's going to automatically populate the checkout step, or if you had a specific checkout option, or what the detail of the object was. And that's because it's all populated in the data layer. And this tells us everything we need to know, and Facebook doesn't have to search, and Google Analytics doesn't have to search. If you're looking to understand what the data layer is on your own website, Google Tag Manager is actually really great for this. So before we were looking at the link click, but we were on this tags tab right here. But if you scroll over, this shows you what's populated in the data layer. So you can actually see what information you can help reuse with Google and Facebook. Also, if you're looking to check out your competitors and what they're populating to their data layer, I like this Chrome plugin. It's called the Data Layer Checker. It's pretty easy to install. And so say, for example, I'm on Medical City's website. That's a healthcare system here in Dallas. I can now see all the things that they're populating to the data layer. So they're populating a little bit more than just, e-commerce data like we were seeing in our other example. Right now, they're populating in their data layer. I'm apparently in their North Texas division. I'm in Dallas, Texas. I am looking at their hospital operations. Here is the page that I'm on, and then service line content. So that's like cardiovascular or orthopedics. So they're collecting all this data about me. They're putting it in the data layer. And that way their other systems can easily access it. Okay, so I'm looking at the comments here before I go on to my next section. Can you use lookup or regex tables to limit the number of tags required? Yes, totally. What I would do for this is I would go ahead and set up a tag, and I'll actually see. You know what, Kevin? I'm going to see if I can populate this at the end of this in a live Google Tag Manager container, and that way I can show you. And I've actually used that, and I really like it. If you know what you're looking at, and you seem to be pretty technical here. So, okay. So Google Tag Manager, we've got our tags, we've got our triggers, we know how to preview them, and that way we can make sure that they're all firing. One added bonus step, if you are trying to preview some Google Tag Manager conversion pixels, I would try and see what triggers a false conversion. So the most common form of this that I see is if you've got a download and you want somebody to fill out their information and then click the download button. What I want you to do is whenever you are trying to test this out and put it in preview, I want you to try clicking that download button without filling out your information. And what you're going to see in your tags is you're going to see, sorry, I don't mean to be making people dizzy here. So what you want to check is if your tag actually fired, even though you didn't do the ultimate action that you wanted a user to complete. So in the example I used, you wanted somebody to give you their information and then click the download button. Well, what if they just click the download button? And so Google Tag Manager will help you figure that out. That's going to be a way for you to reduce wasted spend for you and your clients, right? Because you don't want to optimize for conversions that don't actually happen. You only want to optimize for conversions where people actually give their information. So try and break it any which way you can. And that way you can be better stewards of your client's budget. Okay, so the final steps after you debug and you set up your tags and your triggers is to publish everything. This is a really simple step. You click submit, and then you click publish. Now you can give these different version names and version descriptions, but Google Tag Manager is so good about tracking all of the changes that happened. So even if you did do a detailed list of every single thing that you updated within that one version, Google's already got it covered. So you're kind of doing double work. It's not a bad practice, but it's one of those where if you've only got enough brain units in one day, don't worry about thinking through your version name and version description. And you'll know that you have published everything. If you see this, there are 0 workspace changes. Okay, so now we're getting into something real deep. So this is the part of the presentation that I want to do for those who are more advanced in Google Tag Manager. You've said, Julie, I already understand tags, triggers, but tell me a little bit about server-side tagging. This was another thing that took me a while to get my brain wrapped around, but it is super cool. And in the world of Google, I think that this is actually a bigger deal than Google Analytics 4 because of what it can enable you to do. So server-side tagging was released in beta in 2020. Everybody got real excited about it. They wrote a lot of documentation, and then they kind of stopped talking about it. So if you do any research on this on your own, go ahead and look for stuff that was published after 2020, because what I've seen from the 2020 videos versus what I'm seeing now live, there's already differences in the interface. So in order to understand the server-side tracking, though, you need to understand client-side tracking. Here's another pro tip. If you are trying to learn about server-side tracking, don't go to an article, go to a video. And here's why, because most articles don't take this down step by step. And I don't get credit for this example. It is measureschool.com that gets credit for this example. So normally you have a website and it sends information to a server, and then that server populates HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It's a basic website that we see. Okay? Yay, it's live, it's working. Now, what happens with client-side tagging is that if we ever need to send information to Google Ads or Google Analytics or Facebook, that goes directly from our website after it's fully loaded to all these different platforms. Well, that's not bad if you make sure that you trust all these platforms. And what one of the comments was is that if you enable server-side tagging, it makes everything a little bit more secure, okay? Because what Google and Facebook are telling you is, I promise on my honor, I am not collecting any more information than I need to collect. And we all know that that's a big fat lie. And so what server-side tagging allows you to do is, instead of sending directly from your website to these different vendors, is you actually send it to a server-side container first. Now, this is going to require a lot more development knowledge, but if you have some privacy concerns, this is definitely the way to go, because you're controlling what you send to the vendors. It's not coming directly from the website. It's coming from your server, which you control, not these different ad platforms. So to create a server-side account, you go through the same steps, but instead you click down at the bottom, this server-side tagging. And what you'll notice is that you have a little bit of change in the interface. Everything's pretty much the same, but then you see clients. Well, clients are the ones that actually take the data from the server and process it or accept it. What we're seeing right now, because this is in beta, is that we only have 2 default clients. And whenever you expand that, there is a limited amount of client types. So again, if you're looking at videos for Google Tag Manager server side, look at this screenshot, because this was taken within the past couple of weeks. And if you see them open up different client types and it doesn't include this one, you know that your video is already out of date. So some benefits of server-side tagging: you control who gets the information. You can strip out PII before sending the hit. You can also add data, such as an API key, which, again, as a non-technical person, this didn't have the aha moment that it should, but it will on the next slide. It also reduces load time, because there's only one request that you're sending to the website. So as opposed to right now, whenever you load a website and you say, okay, there's a thank you page, I want to inform Facebook, and I want to inform Google Ads, and I want to inform LinkedIn, and I want to inform Google Analytics, and also I've got a Google Analytics 4 tag. That's 5 different requests that you're sending out from the website. So it's going to slow down your load time. Whereas with server-side tagging, it's pretty nice, because you just have one request, and that goes to the server. And then from the server, it sends it out to all of those different vendors, and you don't have to worry about it. So another thing that's really kind of cool is that with the server-side tracking, whenever you send your data out, the request comes from its own URL. So I'll go back to my handy dandy visual here. Okay, so this up here, by default, the URL that is requesting, all the information is going to be appspot.com, but you can configure this to be your own domain. And so what the big deal is right now is that whenever you have trackers are understanding to block all of our different vendors. And you know why? Because they see the website and they say, aha, I see that analytics.google.com is requesting information. I see that facebook.com is requesting. I see that Google Ads is requesting. But if you load server-side tagging, instead, what they're going to see is, oh, I see the domain example.com is requesting. Now, ad blockers will get around this eventually, but it kind of gives you an extra one-up to make sure that you can capture as much traffic as possible. Okay, now some drawbacks there. This is still in beta, so I wouldn't worry about it for another probably 3 to 6 months. Google doesn't release their timelines, But based on what I've seen, it's really not in a state where you can scale all your tags. But what I would start doing is I would start having conversations with your developers. Get them familiar with the client-side version of Google Tag Manager. Hey, here's all the things that we can do. Here are all the custom variables and triggers. And then once your developer gets more comfortable with it, say, okay, I'd like to dive into server-side tagging. Now, if any new things are released for server-side tagging, probably the first person to mention it outside of Google themselves is a guy named Simo Ahava. I've got his URL in this deck, and so you don't have to worry about remembering that. Now, there is a monthly cost because you are hosting it on your own. You are hosting all the tracking on your own servers as opposed to hosting it on somebody else's servers. It's not a big cost. I think it depends on traffic, but I was hearing anything from, $30 a month, $100 a month. It's not that big. It does require more development knowledge, but I think that it far outweighs any cons simply because you are allowed to control what data you send, who you send it to, and you can help get around some of those pesky ad blockers. A really great example of how we can get around the ad blockers is with the Facebook Conversion API. So this is super, super, super in beta, but just start getting you think about how you can use this across all your websites. So server-side tagging opens up the use of the APIs. And the reason why is because APIs, you don't want to share your API key with anyone and everyone, right? Then they can rack up a real big bill on your behalf. So instead, you want to keep that kind of private. And what you can do is you can launch that API or add it on within that server-side container. And that way you can still communicate with Facebook, but the whole world doesn't see it. Historically, this wasn't possible because what APIs want is they want one computer to talk to another computer. They want one server to talk to another server. And if Google Tag Manager was client-side, well, you were kind of missing that other server, right? You only had the one. And so with this new server-side tracking, what you can do is you can ultimately send the Facebook API. You can send your conversion data directly to the Facebook API. Now, right now, I showed you that there are very limited clients, right? We had all of 5, and Google still hasn't told us how to use these 5 exactly. So what you would need to do is you would need to send the Facebook data to Google to then send it to Facebook, which is super convoluted. But think about this in the long run, okay? If we start to develop clients and custom templates to where we can automatically send data to Facebook, this is in some cases going to be more reliable, and it's going to allow us to, again, go through all of those pesky ad blockers. For more details, there is Measure School. This guy does a better job of explaining it than I ever could, but you're going to have to watch the video a couple of times. Hopefully you're a little bit smarter than me. It has taken me 4 times to go through the video, and even now I'm still parsing through it. But it's super interesting, and it's going to be one of those ways where you can start, taking hold of your data collection, which you couldn't do before. So now some resources. I went online and I Googled for different tricks and tips of how to use Google Tag Manager, even smarter than just, your standard mail to links or your phone links. One of the things I really liked was there was an article about how you can track dark and light modes in Google Analytics using Google Tag Manager. And then Analytics Mania has 99 use cases for Google Tag Manager. And that's anything from, tracking your 404 pages or UX experience updates to SEO updates. I am a little bit biased and I will never implement SEO through Google Tag Manager because of the way that Google crawls. Ask me about that if you want to know more. But other than that, there are some other cool uses out there. We have these links for you. And then if you're looking to point your developers or even yourself in the way of some different resources, these are 4 places that I would definitely recommend starting with. Simo Ahava is going to be the most technical, Analytics Mania is slightly less technical, but still really smart. Measure School helps talk to non-technical people. And then Bounteos is probably the least technical of them all. And that's definitely for whenever you're getting started out. They haven't updated as much with server-side tagging and Google Tag Manager. But I'll leave y'all with those. And then, Kevin, I want to show you how I would set up Tag Manager to reduce the number of tags. Okay, so we've got my example, and I think that the smartest thing that I would do is probably combine, let's just use your email trigger and your mail to trigger. So what I would do is I would start with my variables, and then for the sake of ease, and I go down here and I get my lookup table. And then I would actually need to choose a built-in variable. So your click URL, if your click URL is mail to, or if it's telephone, then you could possibly distinguish the tags. Like, say maybe you want, with your email links, you want to include the page that somebody emailed you on, but for your phone links, you want to include, you know, something else like the click classes. So I would just find out the different outputs that you want, and then reference that in your event tracking. Now, for the argument against Google Tag Manager for SEO. So this is based on the way that Google crawls. So with Google, what they do is they have two different versions of how they crawl your website. The first pass through is HTML, and the second pass through is JavaScript. Now, Google will say that they can still parse JavaScript, and that's great. But if you want something to be immediately picked up by Google, then you want the HTML method. And since Google Tag Manager is by definition JavaScript, then you're going to have a delay in any SEO benefits. Now, what I'll say is that deploying Google or SEO through Google Tag Manager is better than not doing any SEO at all, because we all know how valuable SEO is. But if you have a chance to do it with static HTML, I highly recommend it. Again, Google's going to claim that that they understand JavaScript crawling, yada, yada, yada. But the truth is that in the long history of Google, they're still pretty new at it. And I don't place much trust in Google as far as making sure that they put my best interests at heart, which is why I went ahead and learned so much about Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics, so I could put my best interests at heart. Any other questions that y'all have? How important is, okay, so Chris is asking how important it is to have on your website yet. So you can go ahead and add it to your website. You are not going to break it. I guess my comment was in reference to making sure that you had a default value, because that default value is going to be your backup. So long as you implement your Google Analytics within Google Tag Manager and have that default value set, there's really no way you can go wrong. Just make sure you take out your hard-coded Google Tag Manager first, or sorry, your hard-coded Google Analytics code first. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, thank y'all so much for attending. This presentation will be available online. And then you can also reach out to info@dfwsem if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to help y'all out. So, oh, do agencies automatically do this, or do we need to ask for it? So if you've got a good agency that is on top of their game, they will automatically do this. However, I've seen poor implementations of Google Tag Manager, even on sites as large as so y'all know Bitly, the URL shortening software. So on their website, they actually are implementing Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics the wrong way. So, so I would make sure that you are asking your agencies, okay, this is deployed through Google Tag Manager, right? Because we want to keep our data integrity. But hopefully, if you've got a good agency, they're already one step ahead of this. I have noticed that agencies are much slower to adapt server-side tagging, so you're going to have to push them on that one a little bit. And Karen, we will email out the link for the replay. Okay, well, thank y'all so much for attending. I hope this was very useful information. But as always, reach out if you have questions, and we love y'all's support of DFW SEM. Jenna, if you want to learn some basic regex, I've got it on my website, learnwebanalytics.com. It's regular expression for misspelled words, which for me was the easiest way to learn regular expressions, was with some concrete examples. Okay, well, thank y'all so much. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your night.